Hey, we are here to do the second part of our video today, and this video is for the final inspection portion of our video, where prior we did a video for the deck nailing and dry-in. It was called like an in-progress inspection. So today we're here, once the roof is completed. We have Mike Silvers here and Robert Wormley, our roofer, who has graciously joined us here to put this video on as an educational video, and we're going to now talk about that portion of it. So when we come out to do a final re-roof, we want to talk about these things. So first of all, as stated earlier, we did get a permit, which is required in Seminole County for a re-roof permit to do this job. So I want to hand that over to Robert. And then when we show up here for that, we have to have the manufacturer specs along with the permit and the product approval on site. So with that, we're looking also at a dry-in roof affidavit. This is a deck nailing, roof sheathing affidavit. It states that it was the contractor is stating that he has, and it's notarized and signed by him, the license holder, that he has come out, looked at it, and that the deck nailing was done properly and the dry-in and flashing was installed properly, seeing as how we were just here for a glimpse in time doing an in-progress inspection. So with that, I'll hand that back over to Robert, and now we're proceeding to the product that he used. He's used a Pinnacle pristine roofing shingle, and this is the manufacturer specs. And along with this, we are looking at the product approval, which he's produced on site for us. And he's elected to use a 6-nail pattern versus a 4, which is completely okay. We're not going to make them do 6 for our wind zone, but it's over is better when you're dealing with a wind event and you have 6 nails in your shingles. So he's elected to do that on his own, and he takes pride in what he does, and has done a very good job with the 6 nailing if he's done it according to what the manufacturer and the product approval requires. There is a little difference with the manufacturer's pattern and with the product approval, and I'll let Mike talk a little bit about that as we turn this over to Mike and before we start to do our actual inspection. So Mike, would you like to talk about that?
Sure. The shingles will typically have a manufacturer's recommended installation instructions. They both print these installation instructions on their website. They're also typically printed on the back of the shingle bundle. But there are sometimes some discrepancies between the manufacturer's installation instructions and the way they tested their product for Florida product approval or for a notice of acceptance, which is a HVAC Miami-Dade Broward County requirement. But for most of Florida, it is either a PA or you can actually use the Miami-Dade notice of acceptance. But you want to make sure that in Florida you're installing any roofing product according to its product approval. That's what's registered with the state as the method that was tested and approved for their product approval. So that's very important that you not get fooled, because there are sometimes slight discrepancies. So for roofers, make sure you're always using the most recent product approval for your installation instructions.
Great point, Mike. When we talk about this nailing pattern, it varies a little bit from the manufacturer, but the product approval is what was wind tested. And so this one with the 6 pattern is a little different than what's shown on the manufacturers. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's mainly just making sure that you're looking, and the difference is fairly minimal. If you notice in the manufacturer's installation instructions, they're showing the nails staggered. You can see they're going up and down through the sealant strip. On the product approval, they're all in one line. And this is what you should be following, because again, this is the way it was tested and is required to be followed.
It looks like on this product approval for the 6-nail, it looks like it's 1 inch up from the bottom of the overlap would be the maximum to nail that. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So now we know how to nail the shingle. So that's important. So when we get up there, hopefully we might be able to lift one up without tearing it up. We will try. But we have his affidavit for the deck nailing and dry-in, which is a requirement for Seminole County at final inspection. So with that point, we're going to start our walk around. Is we walk around the roof first. The reason why we do that, we want to look for nail pops from the ground. It's easier to see them when you're looking up the slope of the roof to see if there's any nail pops. And nail pops, I'm talking, that's a term that we use when a nail hasn't been driven where it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be flush with the shingle. And if they failure with the pressure in the gun, or if they hand nail it and they didn't nail it, the nail will stick up higher, and you'd be able to see that from down below if it's popped, because the shingle will not be laying flat against the one underneath it. And so we do that to look at that first from the ground and get an overall view of the roof to see how the job was installed to the manufacturer's installation instructions and the product approval. So with that, we'll take a quick break and we'll start our walk around. Okay, here we are now. We are about to start our final inspection, and what you're looking at is looking up the slope of the roof to see if we see any features that might cause that'll stick out to us that we won't be able to see from the top version. So we're looking from the bottom here to look for nail pops and any issues with the possible flashing that's that may stick out, or any issues that's obvious. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Mike, and we're going to follow him, and we're going to do an inspection.
Okay. So what I want to do when I'm looking at the surface of the roof is try to get at an angle to where you're looking straight up the slope of the roof. And what you're looking for is anything that looks out of place where you've got a high shingle. Those high shingles are an indication that the nail may have been driven in slightly crooked. That causes the head of the nail to kick up and hold the shingle up. But this section from here looks very good. You're going to always have a little up and down on something of any age, because the sheathing tends to deflect a little bit between the supporting members. So just a little bit of up and down is not unusual, but again, what you're looking for specifically is a shingle that's lifted where you can see underneath of that particular, the shingle above it would mean that the nail below that shingle has kicked sideways a little bit, or as Bob said, has popped. So that's what we're looking for, and we'll look at all of the different slopes as we walk around the house and do the same thing. Try to get at that angle where we're looking up at the laps of the shingles. So with that, we'll move over to the other section and take a look. Here we are looking again at the other section of roof. Again, looking to get at the angle that will allow us to look up the slope. A couple of things. This roof is newly installed, so you're going to see some places where the shingles may not be completely set down flat yet. That will take place with heat, and of course the seal strips will seal with the heat as well. But we do want to talk a little bit about what the roofer can and can't do on an existing roof. We have renailed the sheathing, and that's very important to keep the sheathing in place in a high wind event. But what you can't do is completely rework the plane of the roof. The supporting structures are there. They've settled with time, so you do get some undulations in it. But that's not something that the roofer typically can correct with a standard re-roof. They will replace any rotten wood, and that is required. We talked about before always replacing 2 spans or 3 supporting members when you're replacing wood, and using the proper ring shank nail for your sheathing renailing. But again, this roof looks good. I don't see any indications in this section of any pop-ups, and it looks like it's begin to lay down and seal very nicely. So we're done with this section. We can talk a little bit about the eaves while we're down here. We talked about previously when we were here that the flange on the eave drip was fairly small, and we had a situation where the fascia was higher than the sheathing. Robert's done an extremely good job. He's brought out a wide flange eave drip that helps span across that dip, and if you look, you can see that the eaves have a nice continuous slope down, and you don't see them flattening out like they were before. And that's very, very important, because all of the water that hits this roof sooner or later has to run off the eave. So how that detail is extremely important. So we'll move over to the other section and take a look at it. We're on the third section on the front, again looking up the slope. And again, it looks like it's sitting down very nice. I don't see any pops at all. The nails look like they've all been driven nice and flush, so we're in good shape. Again, we've got the flashing here. This section had existing flashing in it that was reusable, so they have in fact reused that what we call a sidewall flashing or rake to wall flashing. That's been reused and set in cement. I can see the signs that there was cement used underneath of it, which is very important in that condition as well. So with that, we'll move around to the backside and take a look at the roof slope from there as well. Here we are now. We're on the side of the house, again, looking up the slope. Again, I don't see any signs of any popped up nails here. They look good. We will talk about these little eyebrows that this is one of them. The house has several. Some of that had existing flashing in it, but some of it did not. So Robert has replaced the flashing and installed flashing where the fascia meets the roof and where the soffit meets the roof up into that wall. And all of that is required to have flashing, and that's been done. So that's a very good thing, and something that whether it's existing or not, and it's not there, you need to install it, which they've done. So that's important. Now we're at one of the gable ends on the house, and there's a couple things we want to look for here. One is the lap on the drip edge. It requires a minimum of a 3-inch lap. If we look up, we can see Bob is being kind enough to hold that lap open, and as you can see there, it is significantly over 3. The building code has a minimum of 3 inches. There's actually not a maximum, but that's got a very good lap on it. Now that is a lap because it's down slope. Bob has moved around now to the peak where the rake end or gable end meets the ridge. That is not actually considered a lap. That is a miter. It's at the top of the slope, so there's no water running down onto it. So that's just basically where you bring the two metals together. You do want to have a lap there, and you want to seal that with plastic roof cement on the roof side. It's much better to go ahead and miter those two rather than just cut and bend. The problem when you cut the face and bend it is at the very top edge you end up with a slight small hole that you can correct by actually overlapping the two pieces and cutting them as a miter. We're on the back of the house now. Again, we're looking up the slope of the shingles, looking for the popped up nails, and also doing a visual on where the different materials meet each other. We can see here there's a base flashing in where the flat roof meets the steep slope roof, what we call steep slope. It's not very steep in this particular instance, but it's not flat, so we refer to it as steep. You can see where they meet. Robert's got flashing in there. And again, looking up at the shingle sections, I don't see any signs from here of any popped up nails. We will look a little closer once we get up on the roof, on the flat section, to look at the roof that's behind it where we can get down and look up at the proper angle. All right, now we're on the other end of the house. Unfortunately here, because of the neighbor's wooden fence that's right on the property line, we're unable to get back here and look far enough back up that slope. So this is one side we'll need to look at closer when we get up on the roof. We can see a little piece of the back slope on the main portion of the house, and again, not seeing any indication of any popped up nails, so that's positive. It's very good. We're up on the roof now, and we're going to start with the shingle roof and work our way around it. Robert's being kind enough to hold that first shingle up. Robert chose to run his eave drip on top of his dry-in, which is permissible. But when you do, you've got to set that first starter shingle, the one that's below that. You've got a section of starter shingle underneath there, and you've got to set that in solid roofing cement in order to get a seal where the starter shingle lays on top of the metal drip edge. Again, we talked about earlier how that wide flange on the drip that Robert provided creates a nice even slope all the way down and over the edge of the roof, which is very important.
Mike, do we want to talk about the gutter installation on this eave here, where he's actually gone through the eave flashing is the proper way to do that?
Well, it's a way to do it. And
versus cutting?
Well, yeah, you don't want to cut your eave drip open in order to facilitate these fasteners. There's several different ways to attach a gutter. This one could be ran with the piece underneath the bracket run underneath of the eave drip, which is really the way I prefer to see it done, but it is okay here. There's a screw ran through it. I'd like to see sealant on the backside of the screw. It isn't mandated, but again, it's a good practice. And definitely don't want to notch out your eave drip if you've got an existing gutter. This gutter was replaced. We're going to talk about that a little bit in a few minutes. But the important part there is if you're using an existing gutter is not to cut out the face of your eave drip where the brackets or straps or spikes and ferrules come back into your roof.
So the point, just to follow up on this, is on the eaves, we have the eave flashing, as Mike was talking about here, with the gutter screws going to the support bracket and into, but the eave flashing itself can be installed either under the underlayment or over the underlayment. In this case, Robert has installed it over the underlayment, and therefore he needed the 4-inch strip of roofing cement, which we validated and shown that was there. So I just wanted to make that, everybody's clear on that's what happened. And now we're going to move up the rake and we'll talk about that.
Okay, now we've moved over to what we call a rake or the gable end. This is a little bit different condition, but really is handled very much the same way. You've got your rake metal, which is the same metal as used down on the eave, installed over the underlayment, and then we've ran a sealant, a strip of plastic roof cement underneath that continuously to set these shingles in as you run your courses up. That's to keep that edge not only sealed from wind-driven rain, but also to help hold that down in the case of a high wind event. It helps to seal that leading edge, which is one of the places where we get a lot of wind, typically is right up against these gable ends. Okay, so we're back again looking at the gable or rake end, and you can see the nail here is held slightly farther back than it would be where you butt your shingle at one of these joints. The reason why, you've got the nose on your drip edge, which obviously you don't want to nail through, and it's typically about 5/8 of an inch. You've got a little gap, and then in this case you've got two 1-bys. You've got a 1-by fascia and then another 1-by freeze board or drip board. And so you need to hold your nail back a little bit to get into to solid wood, and Robert has done that, and that's correct.
Generally like 2 inches back.
Yeah, approximately 2 inches back, and again, that will depend a little bit on the edge condition and how it's constructed, which the roof will get a chance to see when the roof is tore off.
And on this one, you did the same, Robert. The eave or the rake flashing is over the underlayment, so he needed the 4-inch strip of roofing cement.
Correct.
And we checked that is a little bit earlier, so we know that's there. And now, Mike, we're moving on to the cap, where we have the cap shingles, and then we have the ridge vent with cap shingles on that. Maybe you want to tell us about that.
Yeah, this is a plastic continuous ridge vent. As you can see, it runs all the way down the length of this ridge, other than just the very short part of the end. Those are set in place. These nails will be nailed as they're nailed in place, much like this one is. As they're nailed in place, then that'll actually hold the ridge cap down. And those are lapped over, and each ridge cap requires 2 nails. Again, you want to look at the product approval for the manufacturer and see exactly how those are supposed to be nailed in place, and also the length of the nail that's required. The ridge vents will vary a little bit with the length of nail that's required, but it'll tell you right in their product approval how long those nails need to be. Obviously, they've got to get through the ridge cap, through the vent, through the shingles, and into your sheathing to properly hold.
Well, cement the ends.
These ends are, as Robert's pointing out, have been cemented closed, so that front shingle has something to hold it down. You obviously can't put a nail there because it would be exposed, where these are in that same location, but since there's not another ridge cap coming over this, you want to just cement that down so that it doesn't blow up in the wind.
And these are just butted.
Yeah, the ends of this particular ridge vent just butts up to each other.
And we had the product approval for this, Robert, that tells us how to properly install this ridge vent for the winds as it's tested. So we've done that. Everything looks appropriate here. As far as the the nail pattern and the installation of the ridge vent. If you remember, this house had off ridge vents, and Robert elected to remove those and deck those back and do a continuous ridge vent, which provides more ventilation area for his roof. So he's actually done a good job there. So Mike, we will let you turn it over and we'll talk about the shingles, the nailing pattern, and the stagger on those shingles. I think we have one over here we have up that we would like to talk
I
about.
wanted to talk about this side too, I think, Bob, because we couldn't see this from the ground. And that's something to keep in mind. If you remember, we had a fence in the way downstairs, so we couldn't look up for pop-up nails. So what I'm going to do in the interest of safety is walk down to this valley where I can get a little backup and lean on it a little bit and come down and do the best I can to look up this slope. And again, I don't see any pop-ups at all. It looks great. Now we're looking at the nailing pattern for the shingles themselves. And if you look, you'll see here's your butt end of your shingle that we're looking at the nailing. You see 1, 2, 3, and if we were to continue pulling those up, because we've actually looked down this way, we'll see that he's got them 6 nailed. Again, to reiterate, it doesn't have to be 6 nails, but if you want your higher wind speed warranty from your manufacturer, many of the manufacturers say that you need the 6 nail if you want their highest wind speed warranty. The stagger on the end of the shingles, how far each shingle is offset from the previous one. Here's a butt end here, and there's a butt end here. And as you'll look, here's another one right here.
Generally a minimum 5-inch stagger.
That is very, very particular to the manufacturer's product approval. They will tell you each course how to start them off of a rake end, not off of a valley. So if you don't have a rake end, you have to kind of pop a line and create one, like you had a gable end here, in order to know how to properly stagger your shingles. And each shingle will vary by the manufacturer and by their installation instructions. So it's very important that you look at those. There's a couple of reasons. One, you can end up dropping the butt over where they say to nail the shingle, which is not something you want to do. You don't want to have this lap lined up with a nail up here.
Right.
And the other reason is you can get some patterning in these shingles if you don't lay them up with the right stagger. And as you step back in the street and look at them, you'll see diagonal lines that repeat over and over again through the roof, and that's from not using the proper stagger that the manufacturer recommends.
Great point. And now while we're here, Robert's over here on our valley, and we want to take a moment and talk about this valley, Mike, since we're here. You remember that vent was almost through the center when we were here for the tear off and renail. So let's talk about that.
Clear over here, and Robert's done a great job of getting this vent out of this valley, which is not something you want to have if you can help it. And Robert's done well. He offset down inside of there, or had it offset and moved it out of the valley, which is really important. This is what we call a closed cut valley. And the reason it's closed, you don't see an open piece of metal in it, which would be an open valley, but there's 3 different methods, 2 of them closed and 1 of them open. Robert has used the closed cut valley here. This valley actually has the synthetic underlayment that the roof was dried in with, the secondary water barrier that's underneath, ran up the valley. It also has metal ran in the valley, a minimum of 16 inches wide. And then Robert also has installed a peel and stick modified bitumen membrane up this valley as well. So he's actually done more than is required in the valley. The valley is an extremely important part of your shingle roof. Again, much like the eave we talked about downstairs, everything above this, all the water that lands on this roof above this runs down to this valley, and not only on this side like with the eave drip coming down, but also this side. So you literally have water feeding in from 2 sides. So a lot of water runs down this valley, and they've done this properly. You always want to take your shorter side of your roof and run it underneath and have your shingle come down and extend for your closed cut on the bigger piece of the roof, because more water will be running off of this section of the roof into the valley than this section because there's more roof above it. So the idea is to get the water running over this lap as opposed to against it. This water will never get to this lap because there's so much water coming down this way that it's diverting it and forcing it to run down the gutter, down the valley.
Now, Mike, did we check to see if the valley's been sealed?
Yeah, and Robert's doing that right now. That's going to be the next step. But you can see, much like the eave drip and the rake metal, this has to have a continuous bead of sealant to close that off, and there that is.
While we're here, Mike, can we talk about the penetrations with the ductwork caps and the plumbing vent caps? Looks like Robert has put new lead boots on the plumbing, and these are lapped over and into the pipe. He's done that properly. It looks like he's even painted them, so he's done a really nice job, and they match the exhaust vent caps that Mike's going to talk about. Can you talk a little bit about that, Mike, and tell us how those are supposed to be installed?
And there, you'll hear quite a little bit of discussion about this even amongst roofers for this bottom edge. A lot of people like to leave the bottom edge of their vents exposed, showing it lapping over on top of the shingle course below it. Robert, and I prefer this method as well, but Robert has done this, and it's basically the same method. So if you were to peel this shingle off, you would see something just like you would the other method. All Robert's done here is ran a shingle across that in cement, and not driven nails right in this area to where you've got a problem with a leak there. And he's got that very well sealed with plastic roof cement. They look a lot nicer this way. And in Florida with our wind-driven rain, I actually like to see that leading edge shingle over the flange. However, it is permissible under the manufacturer's installation instructions to let that flange run out bare on top of that other shingle. But obviously then you don't want to put nails in the bottom edge of that flange, and that's where you potentially can get into a problem with uplift and wind coming up underneath of the bottom of the vent. He's cut these nice and close. You can see there's actually cement oozing out a little bit, which is what you want to see. That tells you there's plenty there. And the lead boots that are on the plumbing stacks are much the same way. You can have the lead exposed if you want to on the second course up, or you can go across that course and set that in plastic roof cement.
Great point. Now, Mike, as these shingles come and lap over the flat roof portion, we want to talk a little bit about that, on how they're supposed to be sealed and how they go over the bitumen roofing material here.
Yeah, the bottom edge of the shingle needs to lap out onto the modified, and the modified has to come up underneath of here at least 8 inches. It looks like Robert's done a very nice job of staggering out these different, he's got 3 layers of roofing material on the flat deck, as well as the underlayment on the shingle deck. And a lot of times we see a lump right here where they've all been cut even. But Robert has staggered those out, and we've got a nice consistent plane here. This bottom edge is stuck down. I don't want to pull on it too hard and hurt the material, but as you can see, I'm lifting that and it's stuck down well in plastic roof cement. You can see it.
Perfect.
You can see it right there.
That.
And again, don't want to break that shingle.
Right. Good
So
point.
that's important that be sealed, and again, important that all of this material run at least 8 inches up here and then be staggered so you don't end up with a big lump underneath of where your low slope meets your steep slope. We're now over on the front side of the house, over the garage, and what we're looking here is a sidewall or rake to wall condition. Very important point on a shingle roof, or for that matter any roof, where this roofing material butts a wall and that is handled in the proper manner. In this case, there was an existing flashing that was able to be reused, was the proper thickness, and what they did there was ran their underlayment underneath of that flashing flange and nailed it down on the edge of the flashing, the actual metal itself, and then put a continuous bead of plastic roof cement 4 inches wide, and they've run their shingles over into it. The important thing is when you're nailing your shingle is that you don't drive a nail right through this condition. So you stay back, your flashing flange is approximately in this area right here. You want to hold your nails back behind or past that flashing flange so you're not driving right down through there with your attachment for your shingles.
And that's the reason why we've got all the roofing cement on each layer there.
And if you look, you can see again that this cement, I can see fresh cement oozing out behind the shingles, which
Correct.
tells me that they've ran their cement up underneath of there like they should.
It looks like a proper installation
yeah,
that's done there.
It looks good.
Okay.
Now,
Perfect.
something we can touch base on, if we can turn around and look down the roof, you'll see some of the new gutter again. Something to keep in mind, gutters, there's very little in the building code pertaining to gutters. So unfortunately, you're kind of at the mercy of the installer and how well they do their work, because you can't hold them accountable for something that's not clear and plain in the building code. You can see there's a little piece of the top edge of that gutter that has nothing over it. So even though the water's not running off the roof directly at that point, a lot of water will run down these rakes and could, depending on exactly how the roof is shaped, a lot of it could end up running right into that hole, which obviously has the gutter not doing what it's supposed to do. Probably won't cause a problem because you don't have any fasteners in that area, but you certainly are going to get a lot of water down inside of it, which is not what your gutter's supposed to do. Keep in mind, if you have a gutter installed after you've had a re-roofing job done, that the gutter installer has the potential to do damage to that roofing installation. And we're going to talk about that when we go back to the low slope roof a little, but it's important, and you may want to consider, if you have your gutter installed after the roof is done, having your roofer come back out and make sure that the gutter installer has not damaged his roof, which does happen quite often, in fact. Now, expect, unless you've prearranged with your contractor and told him that's something you wanted to do so he could build that into his price, you may need to pay the roofing contractor for a service call to come back out and inspect your gutters and make sure they haven't damaged your roof. If they've done significant damage, you'll want to know that as soon as you can, so you have an opportunity to go back to the gutter installer for the problems they may have created. So it's a real good idea to get your roofer to come back and look at your roof if you've done gutters after your roofing project. Okay, as you can see, there's a very short little valley here, but it also has to be dealt with just like in any other valley that we talked about on before. Your underlayment needs to be there, and your metal, and then your shingles. This is again a closed cut valley. It's ran the right way. The shortest section of roof is ran underneath. The large section of roof is lapped down over. So we've got a good valley condition here. Again, that's one of those little eyebrow conditions we talked about, where Robert has either reused the flashing that was there in some instances and installed new flashing where it wasn't. So again, done a real nice job on the base flashing. Your head wall or top of slope flashing, same thing as your side wall, needs to be set in cement, and he's done all of that, and it looks real good. That's a very critical part of any roofing project, is where your flashings are installed, where the roof terminates or has something coming through it.
Mike, that's a great point. I do remember you talking about earlier the roof deck on the existing home, where the roofer has no control over the roof deck on how it was installed, and over time how the product can warp or change direction a little bit. So here's a good point, looking laterally at this roof deck, and if we go up towards the center of the roof, up, you can see that there's a depressed area there. And we've walked on that. That's not rotten wood. That is just the way the roof decking is, and as you said, the roofer's not obligated to do that, right, Mike?
That's correct. And this is a situation where you've got probably a little settling of either the rafters or the trusses, and that will happen. And there's really nothing that the roofer can do to correct that, short of tearing off the whole thing and running straight lines and putting new sheathing on and all of that. So those little ups and downs like that are to be expected. And there's nothing improper about that. It's just part of the existing conditions that you deal with on a structure that has some age to it. And to be perfectly honest, sometimes on a brand new construction, you'll have the same kind of tolerances where you have some ups and downs in it. Of course, if they get too far, then you want to look at what those tolerances are and make sure that they're okay. But that's perfectly very typical and perfectly fine the way that it's been roofed there.
And so, Mike, you and I have walked this roof. It looks good, the entirety. We want to talk a little bit about the chimney. That one obviously had existing flashing, Robert, that you reused.
Yes.
And so that's all sealed, as you can see. Mike, did you want to talk about that a little bit? And then we'll get down to the flat roof.
These are a pre-manufactured chimney. There's several
Hold on,
different
guys. Let's cut for a second. Let's
Okay.
get down there. Yep. And then we'll pick it up here. And just wait for a second. I gotta refix this.
We nail it down. Let's pull it down. Feel like it wasn't like that before, where we nail deck it to the true truck now.
You guys ready?
Okay.
All right. Okay, this is a chimney. This is a pre-manufactured chimney. There's several different manufacturers. A lot of the old ones we saw were made by a company called Van Packer. Sears, Wards, a lot of companies sold these as part of your furnace inside the house when they used to have oil-fired furnaces. That's where you'll see most of these, but you also can have it for gas as well. They typically, as you can hear, that's made out of metal. It looks like brick, but it's actually metal. There's a flange on this that comes from the factory, and what Robert has done there is torn all the old material and cleaned that flange. Again, got his underlayment underneath of the flange, nailed the flange back down, and he's installed a membrane and plastic roof cement all the way around this, and that does a couple things. It seals the head of the nail that's been nailed through the flange. It also extends that flange for all practical purposes, makes it a little wider so you've got more of the shingle to bring it onto, and then another layer of cement put on top of the membrane for this shingle to be brought into. And as you can see, it's created just a little bit of a hump behind it, which is good. If this is over 40 inches, then you've got to have a cricket behind it to
Mike,
direct that.
Wouldn't that be 30 inches? The code's 30 inches.
I think it may be 30 inches. I probably have misspoke.
Correct.
So
So this is an existing condition where, as Mike was saying, they used the prefab chimney, which is fine, and he's talked about the roofing cement around it and the installation of the underlayment. And so we just want to talk about, Robert, you did verify that flashing was still good on that?
Yes.
So he could reuse this chimney because the flashing was really still good. Otherwise, he would have had to install his own flashing, right, Mike?
Right. You can-
And probably do some counter flashing or something up there.
you can see this has been cut here, so there's a flashing up underneath of it. Sometimes this is part of this assembly, but you could in fact cut this off, flash up underneath of it, and then reattach it. So
Exactly. So that's the point we wanted to make on that. So looking at this roof, we have a pretty nice roof. Now, Mike, as we've walked around and looked at everything, it looks good. The part we really want to talk about now is the flat roof section and the skylights. And Mike, we'll take a second and we'll talk about that. We're on the flat roof portion now, and we're going to turn it over to Mike, and he's going to talk about the skylight, the bitumen flat roof section as well, and also the looks like we have some insulated iso board up here that's raised up. As if you remember, we talked about that in our first video about the conduit situation that was ran over the roof. So we'll let Mike talk about that, and also the gutter situation that's on this flat roof portion. So Mike, can you kind of tell us a little bit about that?
keep in mind that this flat roof, or what we call a low slope roof, as opposed to steep slope, which is for the shingles. These low slope roofs are a completely different roof system than the steep slope or shingle areas. So they have their own product approval, their own manufacturer's installation instructions. This is a wood deck, so typically you use a specific nailed base sheet underneath on your wood. Depending on how your next layers go down, if they're going down in hot asphalt, you also need to put a rosin paper underneath the base sheet. It's required. This job is done with a self-adhered membrane, so you don't have to put the rosin paper underneath. Robert he actually improved this system. This is a full 3-ply system. It has the nail base, it has a self-adhering mid-ply, and then a final self-adhering cap sheet. So it's a 3-layer installation, which is very, very important. And again, it's not required by code. You could have gotten by with just the nail base and this cap sheet, but being a high quality roofer like he is, he wants to give his customers a little bit more. So he's putting that intermediate layer in, and that's a real good thing to do. We talked about a couple of areas that had conduits. These conduit were ran on top. This is a tongue and groove deck inside, so when it was originally built, it was exposed. So you don't want nails or fasteners coming through it, and obviously didn't want a conduit attached to the underside of the tongue and groove. It wouldn't have looked good. So when they ran for, I believe, ceiling fans or some light fixtures, they've ran conduit out on top of the roof deck. And what Robert did here, and this is a real nice installation, you can see this high spot right there, that's where the conduit is. He took tapered insulation panels and cut a cricket or a saddle behind this, which one is making the transition over the conduit, which is good. Again, there's not much you can do with that. It's much better not to have the conduit there, but he didn't have that option because it was already existing. And he's put it up, and as you can see, it's made a nice smooth transition over the conduit. Back over here, there was one that even ran farther out into the roof. It came out here and ran all the way down to here. And you had a conduit running right up here. Now you can see from here to here, Robert has laid up some tapered edge board or tapered insulation panels and created a cricket too. That's so he can take it down to nothing here and has the thickness that he needed to get over the conduits here. So again, that's made a very nice transition on this roof and kept that conduit from making a strain on all of the roofing membranes. If you take that roofing membrane and rolled it right over that conduit continuously and kept it tight to the conduit, you would have a point on the top of that where the membrane is bent very steeply, and sooner or later that top edge, because of that real tight bend, will wear out and you'll lose your granules, and that'll be the first place that the roof starts degrading. We talked about the lap earlier with the shingles and having that set over your cement and staggering out your roof plies, again the full 3 plies. Robert also replaced the skylight on this job. Now, people will say in many instances, you'll see in a lot of roofing literature that 8 inches is the minimum height for a curb. And if this had a parapet wall along that side that blocked the water from getting off and it went through scuppers, you would certainly want to adhere to that 1/8 inch height. But because the edge of this roof is open and has good slope, he didn't have to rework this curb. It's sufficiently high enough above the roof, and he's installed a new impact resistant skylight. He's got neoprene moistured screws holding that in, and if you'll see, there's quite a bunch of them. He's got 4 on each side and 3 on each end. So he's got his skylight replaced and got a real nice looking low slope roof here. We'll look next at gutter detail, but we'll come around and get a new angle for our camera and go from there.
Mike was talking about the flat roof portion. He's covered everything that's pertinent to that as far as the installation. And now we come back to the back portion of this roof, and we see something that kind of really, a couple things that stick out to us. And I'm going to let Mike talk about that as we finish up our on the roof video portion.
So what we have is Robert had installed this drip edge without the gutter being in place. The old gutter was removed. He finished up his roof, then the gutter installer came in. So what they will typically do before they start running their gutter is they'll go along and try to create a little bit more space behind this eave drip. And they go along the edge of the roof and pull on this drip edge. Now, if they get a little bit overdone, you'll see it actually puts some wrinkles in the face of the drip edge, which is not something you want to do. That kind of shows you they've pulled and lifted too hard. But worse yet, you can see where they've opened this lap up. That lap is critical because all of the water for not just the flat roof, but all of the roofs leading onto the flat roof all comes off of this edge. And so you'll get a large sheet and very deep sheet of water coming off that edge into the gutter. And if it hits that open seam, it's going to run back in and get water in behind it. So that's critical that be pulled back into place. They can do that with the same neoprene moistured screws that they use to attach their bracket. If they've pulled them open that far, they can use those to pull those back into place again. But obviously that did not get done here. Right. Another concern is here, because needing to terminate this end, normally you do make a small slice and you try to make that cut as close to this end as you can so you can slip the rest of the material behind the metal edge. But as you can see here, they've cut it twice. This cut wasn't used and it goes clear to the top, so there's a hole clear up here which could conceivably get inside and this cut, and then they've cut here quite a little ways from the end, so you've got two openings here where this is slid up and to the point of doing that. I actually would prefer to see them than cut the face is to actually cut the end of the gutter, and then you can slip it in behind without having to open up this notch here. Now that will let a little water run out when your gutter gets really, really full, but it's running out onto a finished roof, which isn't going to hurt anything. When you cut up into this, now you're getting up into the way that this roof transitions between vertical and horizontal, and there you can have a leak issue. As where if you cut the end out to clear this, you wouldn't have that same problem.
So, Mike, with that being said, they've caused a code issue now by not the E flashing not being lapped 3 inches. So in order to fix that properly, they would have to tear this apart, remove the gutter and do that. So what do you recommend in that, short of having the roofer to take all that apart?
Yeah, and the rough part is because this flange returns under this roof, that means you'd also have to tear into the roof. Which is really not something you want to have to do to a brand new roof. So the suggestion would be here to take these two screws out, slip a piece of metal up behind this one, behind this seam, caulk that, caulk this, caulk that, and then caulk the heads of the screws.
Correct.
And you can correct that. Down at the lap down here where we talked about, that needs to, now that they've opened it up that much, that should have sealant put up between the lap in there. And then, as I said, a neoprene moistured screw. And they may need to start with a longer one to drive that thing in and pull that face back together like it should be. And they need to do that everywhere that they've ran gutter on this eave drip, because all of them are opened up. There's another one over to our right here on the shingle section that is also opened up.
Correct.
Not unusual, unfortunately. We do see it quite a bit with gutter installations, but that's why I suggested that you at least consider having your roofer come back out if you've got a new roof and look at any work that your gutter installer may have done and make sure that it's not in some way hurt his roof or caused him to where, if it popped up a year or two from now due to a leak, would cause him to say, well, no, that's not my issue because I didn't do that. And that would be a correct interpretation. It's not his fault, so it voids that portion of his warranty. So you want to try to catch it as soon as you can in hopes that you can get it corrected before all the parties are left and moved on from your project.
Yes. Okay. And with that, we will go down and we'll just do a finish up and we should be done. Okay, now that we've completed the inspection, we've done a pretty good look at this roof, and we've determined, Mike, that it's a pretty good job.
Absolutely.
Looks like the gutter guy has come and caused some situations. As Mike had talked about earlier, the gutters aren't code, but they do create code conditions when some of the things that we've talked about happen, and that's what's happened. And our roofer is kind enough to come back and make some of those corrections for the owner. This is a really what I like about this roof is it covered a lot of the situations that we run into. It has a flat roof. It has a skylight. It has a step-up wall or little gables. It has a chimney. It had a plumbing vent through the valley. It had a lot of things if I remember correctly, we had plywood decking on one side of the roof and then lumber decking on the other side of the roof. So, and then also we had a condition where the conduit was run on top of the roof on the flat roof portion, which is always a challenge when you go to re-roof and create situations like that, and trying to correct that problem, which Robert, our roofer, did a great job putting the ISO board on there to raise that up to eliminate that condition. So we want to thank Mike with the Florida Roofing and Sheet Metal Association for being so kind to come out here and provide this educational video, and Robert Wormley for being able to take the extra time with us to help us with this video, and also Goba, who also is a big supporter of what we do in the Central Florida Roofing Association's work, and to try to create a better job, to create where the job is really not that hard to do, but there's a lot of things you run into with roofing that cause problems, and leaking is a big problem because our environment is tropical. And so with that, I want to say thank you.
You're quite welcome. We enjoy working with the building officials. We're all part of one big industry, and it's very important we all work together.
And that's it. Appreciate it. See you on the next video.